Hey, I always like it when it goes to your live. That means things are working. So, hey, good morning, everybody. Lance Tarchioni here with my partner in crime, Chris Kallal. I traveled south this morning down to the land where it's warmer, and we're coming to you from an undisclosed location in the Springfield area this morning. And Chris and I are going to cover a few things. He is itching to get out of here because he's scheduled to plant a plot this morning. So this man has been, I don't know if he slept in the last 10 days or not. He took a family vacation, and ever since he got back, he's been planting plots. So Chris does a lot of really neat trials, and it's hard to find farmers that are willing to take the time to do trials. So this guy, built a plot planter and got access to a tractor, and he's kind of found a new way to skin that cat. He's just doing the trials. I realized something, Jen. You've got a position wrong. I should be the one that's trade seats with me now.
Now you're really looking
he like
change drinks and everything.
Move my notes, get my phone down. Yep. All right. This is professionalism here. So there. Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm already bigger than him, and if I'm closer to the camera, he looks like a little kid sitting back there. I don't like that. so anyway.
And he's got a boisterous enough voice that it carries.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're good. It's bouncing off the walls in here. So thanks for joining us this morning. Probably going to be a little bit of a short live crowd. When we scheduled this, they were damn sure it was going to rain last night, maybe yesterday, for sure today. Now it may not rain at all. So you guys are familiar with how that goes. And certain parts of the state are dry. We had about a half inch on some of our ground yesterday morning that came kind of out of nowhere. Iowa was getting a pretty good rain right now, but it hasn't come across the river yet, I don't think. So anyway, we may get some rain today. We may not. Been lots and lots of people stressing out about the weather forecast, the temperatures and moisture, and when are these perfect planting conditions going to come to an end, and how aggressively should we be planting? And that's about all that I've been talking about with people the last, 10 days probably. And Chris has got the radar. Yeah, the Mississippi River is almost still blocking it. Looks like Adams area might be getting a little rain. So if that makes it across the river and doesn't fall apart, looks like we might get some rain today, but it's going to slide north of Chris's area for the most part. Looks like the way that's tracking. So you may not have to hurry to get that plot in because
I may not have to. It should be fine.
Yeah. So anyway, so the other thing I'm gonna let you in on a little bit of a fun we've been having on the team. Half of our sales team thinks that Chris and I don't agree with each other on anything, and that we're in two different universes when it comes to should you be planting or not. So they're going to be, I think, sadly disappointed when we sound pretty similar here this morning, and there's not a fight that breaks out in the room because they've been building this up for like a week, making a big deal out of nothing.
Yep.
And so anyway, I'll let Chris start off with where planting progress is in his area and his thoughts on what he's seeing and conversations he's been having since he's the guest today. So
well, thank you. So honored to be here this morning, and thank you for traveling south to do this and a delay. My mornings aren't terribly easy sometimes, and I have kid duty a lot of times at home. So this worked better for my schedule to try to accommodate this. So across my footprint, obviously been kind of hammered down for almost I'd say a little under 2 weeks. There was a few guys obviously that got rolling prior to Easter, but not a lot went in the ground prior to Easter, and then really that Monday, Tuesday after Easter is when things fired up. And man, I mean, what a pace! It is remarkable, almost astonishing at how fast the crop has gone in the ground this year. We covered a lot of acres in that week after Easter through that Saturday when we caught some spotty showers and this past weekend. And then guys are back running again this week already as well. Got guys that are totally done with both crops, got guys that our beans are done. Still got some corn to go. We give it another, I'd say 3 to 5 days and a good run, and then pretty much everybody across my footprint will be done. And I don't remember a spring like this in a long time of when we've had this type of a pace and put it in this quickly.
Right.
And which kind of, Adam was giving me grief the other day. One of my reps that.
That would be producer Adam
producer Adam that's not here producing today.
Yeah.
But
we've got producer Jennifer.
We got producer Jennifer with us today. But what probably concerns me out of that is we've put it in so fast. We obviously can't take it out as fast as we can put it in, and that's always been the case, right? I mean, that's never that's always been the case. That doesn't change. But to put it in 5 to 7 days. I guess, and so where I go with that is, some of the concern I have is that, I think we've been blessed the last several years having a spread out planting window,
right.
And that works well for harvestability and beans ripening over a longer period of time, and corn, ripening over a longer period of time helps our late season intactness, integrity, stalk quality, all those types of things. And those are things that I start to think about already is what kind of pressures is it going to put on us this fall, and being able to get this crop in the bin. We might have overly dry crops and all those types of things.
Right.
So I hate to go down that road now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're a long ways from that.
Yeah. Well, you guys are done planting, so you got to find something to worry about. So
that's the next thing we can fret about. But I think that is a reality that we're going to have to think about as we go through the summertime and think about, how do we manage fungicides and how do we think about managing the harvest of this crop that we put in so quickly. But to the task at hand, I'm no different than anybody else. Obviously, Lance and I have been getting inundated with questions around, do we plant, do we not plant? If I am going to go to plant, what hybrid do I plant, or do I plant corn, do I plant beans, do I park the planter, all those types of questions. And so I'm no different than anybody else, and been getting several of those. And I've enjoyed the people trying to fuel a dispute between the two of us, and we don't have a dispute between the two of us. Jennifer's back here trying to throw a little gas on the fire right now.
Yeah, this all started with the group text where people put words in his mouth and people put words in my mouth. Neither one of us actually said either of the things that we were accused of saying or thinking. But it's a totally fabricated feud between the agronomist on the West Central Illinois team, and it was around planting. It was perceived. This is probably fair. Chris probably is a little more of an aggressive. If soil conditions are good, go plant kind of guy. And I do like to consider a few other factors other than just soil conditions. But I agree, soil conditions do trump the other factors that I like to consider. So it was really much ado about nothing. And I've been looking forward to this episode just so people would be mad that we weren't fighting about something. So
yeah, he's right. I probably am just a little bit more bullish. But what I have to try to remind some people and bear in mind is, right, I mean, my whole geography is south of Lance's whole geography.
Right.
And we do stay a little warmer sometimes, and we do stay, we do have, it's, from where we sit today to where Lance lives is probably 80 to 90 miles due north of us, and things do change a little bit across that geography, right? So sometimes we have to take that into consideration that he runs a little more northern latitude than I do, just slightly.
And you're also, working in, the most aggressive, the most progressive, well-drained part of the state. Right. Typically Chris's territory is the first place where anything gets planted in Illinois. Southern Illinois, which is even warmer, is generally too wet.
Correct.
And so you would think Southern Illinois would plant first, but they generally don't. Often Southern Illinois plants last because they're just too wet. And the rest of Illinois, north of Springfield, watches with envy of what's going on, down here in central Illinois. And we oftentimes have the same soil conditions as central Illinois, but we don't always have the same temperature. Now, I did do a little math before Chris got here, and Jennifer pulled up her 10-day forecast, and I compared that to my 10-day forecast. And over the next 10 days, counting today at home, I'm going to generate a whopping 37 heat units.
Yeah, that's not
And Jennifer's going to get 49.
Yeah.
So there wasn't as much difference as I thought there might be. And she was asking me some questions about, well, what does that mean, and how do you take that into account? And one thing that I've been harping on to people, having this conversation over the last, because this conversation's been almost constant for me, because when you guys started planting, I had a lot of people that were afraid to start then, and so I kind of feel like I've been having the same conversation with the same people for like 3 weeks now.
Yeah.
And I was joking with a guy working that writes for Farm Week that I talk to every now and then, and he might put this in print, but I made the comment to him. I said, I kind of think everybody that works with farmers related to planting decisions is probably tired of having the same conversation, because that's all anybody wants to talk about is, should I plant? Should I not plant? Is it okay if I'm done planting? And I love your story of, well, if you're done, why are you asking me if it's okay if you're done? We can't unplant it, so you got to stick with your plan there. But and so much of this is not black and white. It's more psychology than it is agronomy. And what I talk a lot with guys about is, well, what's going to give you the most peace of mind? Are you going to be more stressed worrying about what you got in the ground, or will you be more stressed worrying about the fact that you're not planting when you could be? And the answer to that, a guy the other day told me, he said, well, both those things are going to irritate me. I'm like, well, I can't help you then, because you got to favor one or the other to help yourself make the decision. And I was also talking with a grower the other day, or a dealer who farms a little bit, about the difference between a really big farmer and a small farmer too. And if you've got thousands of acres to plant, this is easy. If it's fit, you plant. You got to, because it's going to take you 6 weeks to get your crop in the ground. Those of us that, farm smaller scale like I do, we have the luxury of picking our days, and we have the luxury of waiting, and we have the luxury of trying to do it at what we think is the best time. Well, that's what creates all the stress and the strain. If you're big enough that you don't have a choice but to plant, well, that's fairly easy. Go plant. But all this angst and anxiety and agony that people are going through are generally from people that, they maybe need 10 days to plant their crop. And, what are the best 10 days to put the crop in the ground? And the other thing that, gets a little frustrating is to truly answer the questions that we get on a daily basis with certainty. We would have to be able to predict the future, right? Which we can't do, because we've got a 10-day forecast that looks pretty sketchy, but it changes every day. Every time I look at it, we don't really know what's going to happen over the next 10 days. We've got even less of a clue what happens in 10 days after that. I made the comment to Jennifer that, at the pace that we are generating heat units over the next 10 days, if that doesn't change, it's going to rot in the ground before it generates enough heat units to come up. Right. But it's going to warm up. It's not going to stay this cold. We're probably going to get the 110 heat units that we need to get corn out of the ground, get the 130 heat units we need to get beans out of the ground. Some of that early plant stuff has already generated enough heat units with that warm week. That stuff's up and looks great. And the only thing those guys have to worry about is a May freeze. Right. Yes. Which can still happen too. So all of this stuff, you can look like a genius or you can look like a fool based on what Mother Nature does, and we don't know what's going to happen.
And hindsight is always 20/20.
Right.
And last minute comment there that I generally try to point out whenever I have this conversation with guys is that the forecast is calling for some cooler temperatures, right? But you made the point earlier that I'm becoming more and more of a fan of when the ground is fit, we go plant. And because the challenge is, while we know that temperatures will likely warm up, right? I mean, that's a given. As we move into later April and we move into May, we will have warmer temperatures. What we don't know is, will the soil be any more fit then than it is now?
Well, it can't be more fit.
We'll
be lucky if it's equally fit.
Right. And I remember in times past, there's been, we've had this conversation with people and people have held off. And then you get into May and you end up planting in less than ideal conditions because the soil conditions aren't as good. And guys have made the comment, well, if I knew I was going to mud it in the middle of May, I just would have mudded it in the middle of April. And so that's where I've got a couple guys that I work with that, they always talk about their dads, which would be, the equivalents of my grandpa type generation. That, it was always the notion of when the soil is fit, you go plant, because you take advantage of that soil just being at the right, the right moisture levels, works well. It's just got ideal planting conditions, and let's go plant into that and hope that Mother Nature takes care of us and we get the stand that we need to get, because it's not fun planting into less than ideal soil conditions and having to compromise the crop right out of the gate because you stuck it in the ground in something that's less than ideal. And so that's where I probably become a little bit more bullish in some cases, is because the ground is fit right now in most cases. It's just beautiful. I was on some, and I know Lance is a strip tiller, and he sent a video to us the other day. I was on some strip till ground yesterday planting a corn plot, and it just the most mellow, ideal, just beautiful soil conditions, and it's hard to not plant into that.
And I think too, there's everything has risks. There's a risk to planting. There's a risk to not planting. And to me, it's kind of a lesser of evils thing. Gets back into that psychology. It's really hard to definitively answer the agronomic question. We all get made fun of for saying it depends with every answer we give. And this is a good example of that. If, and I've told everybody that's asked me, should I be planting corn yet or not? What's late April, early May going to give you for a planting window? If you knew that late April, early May, you were going to have these kind of soil conditions and the crop would be up in a week, well, that would be better. But you don't know you're going to have those soil conditions. And to Chris's point, past history has said that, oftentimes we don't have as good soil conditions. And if you make the decision to wait and be patient, you need to be patient all the way through. You can't pass up good soil conditions on April 15th because you thought the weather forecast was kind of crappy and then mud it in on May 5th. That makes no sense whatsoever. Wait till May 10th and plan it right. Don't lose your patience because it's getting late. And that's what happens to a lot of people. Everybody can be patient on April 10th. Can you be patient on May 10th? Probably not.
It's not as easy to do.
It's not as easy to do. Chris can't be patient on any day of the year. So there's so many different philosophies. There's the don't plant ahead of a cold rain. We've been pretty dry through this cold stretch, which is they say we store the seed in a cold, dry place.
That's what the bag tells us to do.
So that's right. So that's where it is. And being wet is actually to me more of an evil than being cold. And I've been involved in some groups internally looking at seed quality and trying to understand why we have stand failures and why we have emergence issues, and can we address that in some way? And in Chris and I's market, really all of Illinois, excess moisture is responsible for most of the stand failures, not cold temperatures. And frankly, corn can survive in saturated soil longer if it's cold versus if it's warm. So if you're going to be excessively wet, being warm doesn't help you. And more often than not, when I see stand failures, it's because we had excessively saturated soils for too long of a period after planting. And very rarely do I see stand issues just because it was too cold. And so far we've been, it looks like over the next 10 days anyway, we're going to be too cold. But it's not going to be that wet based on current forecast situations. We're so dry in certain parts of the state, it would take a lot of rain to make it really wet. So, I don't see anything that scares me that much. Do I wish it was going to be warmer? Yes. Chris made the point about, we're so compacted. And, if you just think about logistically from all the things we have to get done after planting, we got a lot of herbicide applications to make. We got side dressing to do. Chris is talking about, the harvest is going to be compact. Well, the whole, everything's going to be compact, and we can plant faster than we can do anything else. So our retail applicators and custom applicators are going to have their hands full getting soybean pre's, corn pre's, burn downs, early posts. It's all going to hit at the same time. Logistically, lots of challenges there. Chris was talking about spreading the harvest out. You're doing some trials the last couple of years with, maybe exploring, spreading maturity range as a way to spread harvest out. So why don't you talk about that?
Actually, I was going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So Lance, plant corn today or not plant corn today?
I would say plant corn today.
I actually am a little shocked that he said that.
Yeah,
so I'm surprised myself.
Yep. So no, and it kind of, again, it depends. Have you not planted corn yet, or are you 2/3 done? If you're 2/3 done, I probably would. If you haven't started yet, I know how startup goes on my farm. The first day I go to the field, I'm lucky to get 8 acres done that day. So I want to find out if everything's working. You'll laugh at me for this. I had a perfect opportunity where my brother-in-law's acres are that I custom plant for him. It's been really dry. He was anxious to get his corn planted. So we've been able to plant several hundred acres of corn and get a lot of work done, and none of it's mine. So perfect. Yeah. So if
your brother-in-law watches this,
no. So if I start planting corn, it'll actually be tomorrow if it doesn't rain. So I don't think there's anything wrong with getting corn in the ground. I wouldn't be working around the clock. If you want to pace yourself a little bit. But I agree with Chris. I mean, these soil conditions. Honestly, when I started planting, my brother-in-law's crop and saw how nice it was going in, that made me want to plant mine more than I did before I started, honestly, because I don't know that I've ever seen it be better, which personally I like, because I remember in the wintertime, we weren't getting a lot of freezing and thawing. It was a warm winter. It's kind of a weird winter, and people are all stressed out about, the soil's not going to be good in the spring because we're not having the right kind of conditions. All you need for good spring soil conditions is to be dry, and we're dry, and it's just beautiful. So no sins have been committed from a soil condition standpoint this spring, and that's a nice way to start off.
So something you just hit on there. I haven't gotten this question yet. I'm a bit surprised, and I figure probably will at some point in time. But Lance, talk about so that mild winter we had. Obviously we had the stretch of really cold weather right there ahead of Christmas.
Right.
But then after that, we really didn't have much freezing and thawing. We were really no snow to speak of. But talk some about that in regards to early season insects. And potential pressure, because sometimes there's some I'm losing the word that I want, but not everybody always thinks about that, I guess, in the right way.
Right.
In my mind. And so hit on kind of how that winter may play out in the early insects for the next couple of weeks.
I mean,
all the way through. Let's talk all the way through corn.
I think and I haven't been watching. The Extension Service typically does a pretty good job with cutworm monitoring. I'm seeing moths in the headlights that I would say are probably cutworm moths. So that moth flights that going on, we don't have probably as green a fields as we do some years because it's been cool. But those cutworm moths are attracted to cover crops, winter annual weeds. Anything green looks like a good egg laying site for them. From a wintering standpoint, I mean, a lot of the insects that we worry the most about, you mentioned rootworm, corn borer, those type of pests aren't as impacted by the winter weather. I know, I know following some other warm winters, it seemed like grub pressure was pretty intense. I think some of our insect species are more favored by warm weather. Flea beetles was always the one that's kind of the classic textbook insect pest, and it's for inbred production with Stewart's blight or Stewart's wilt, probably more of an issue. But from a commercial corn perspective, I don't know that flea beetles are that big of a deal for us. But grubs, maybe stink bugs, things of that nature, that overwinter. Did we have conditions that favored them? Some insects, probably do better with some snow cover. We didn't have a lot of snow cover in some cases, so it varies by species. We've got a lot of insects that migrate in. The stuff that migrates in, our winter doesn't really matter, but the winter from where they're migrating from possibly did. So a lot of factors to consider. I think insects in general is something that we have to manage by scouting on an annual basis. I don't think we can really predict it. We just need to stay vigilant about that and address those things as they come. And I do think that there are situations where we get focused on planting and weed control, and people kind of forget the bugs sometimes. And it would be sad if your perfectly planted, timely planted corn gets ruined by cutworms.
Yep. And one of them and I mentioned rootworm there, I guess, because one of them that I get a question about regularly is that, especially when we have a hard winter, guys say, well, surely we froze those guys and they didn't survive. And really I guess from a corn rootworm perspective, the winter doesn't really have any impact or very little impact on corn rootworm. Yeah. What is the biggest dictator of corn rootworm survivability is the soil, or how wet the soil is at the time of hatch.
Yep.
And I always like to point out, right, when guys ask you, well, we had a hard winter, surely we killed all those things. Well, they survive in Minnesota and Iowa and places far north of us every year. Right. And it's all more about how wet is the soil at the time they hatch, because they're not good swimmers. They suffocate very quickly. Right. Yep. And so, just because we had a warm winter does not mean we will or won't have more corn rootworm. Right. This year, it's all more dependent on that hatch.
Yeah, dry springs favor corn rootworm because you don't lose. Mortality is fairly low through hatch. And if you remember back to how wet we were in 2015, I had places that had 30 inches of rain in June in 2015, and that's actually kind of what I think started this era of low rootworm pressure that we've been enjoying across central Illinois for the past several years. Is we just decimated that population and drowned them all after hatch. And that combined with switching to pyramided traded hybrids and smart stacks coming out and better rootworm trait protection is what brought us to where we are today, where we don't have as much pressure as we used to have, although we are seeing indications that pressure is starting to creep up. But I agree with Chris. Winter temperatures got nothing to do with rootworm pressure. They are very cold tolerant. Now, southern corn rootworms are not. That's why they're in the south. We've got a mix of westerns and northerns, and you can freeze them as much as you want, and they'll be fine. So I wanted to one question I had from a dealer actually yesterday that I thought would be good to call out. He sent me a list of 4 hybrids that our seed guide ranked as all the same emergence. So Chris, the list was 6270, 6595, 6618, 6606. Okay. And so he was looking for coaching from me on, well, which one of those has got better emergence? And if I'm going to push things, do I want to plant the better emerging one? And I agree with our ratings that those hybrids are, fairly similar. I mean, sometimes one looks a little better than another, but to me, none of those jump out as significantly better emerging. But there is one of those hybrids that's not sold out. And so I called out, well, if you want to think like a pessimist, and think, well, which one of those could I get more of in a replant situation? That would mean you plant your 65, 95, because those other three, you ain't getting no more of those. And that is I think something that's been in the back of my mind, going through this spring season where everything's just going in so fast. Fingers crossed that nothing bad happens to a lot of this stuff, because year in and year out, there's always corn hybrids that get tight in supply. And if you do get yourself in a replant situation, we got plenty of seed, but it isn't going to be what you planted the first time in a lot of cases. So another thing to keep in the back of your mind if you're looking for an excuse to talk yourself out of planting something.
Yeah. I always enjoy to the point there's a limited supply of something, and guys will grab that box first, or those bags first, and that'll be the very first thing they put in the ground. And, they sometimes those people get really proud of what they just did, and they tell you, hey, I went ahead and got that planted early. It's like, probably wouldn't have been the product I would have chose for you to put first, right? I mean, let's try to get that thing as good of a look as possible. And sometimes planting it first, or sometimes planting it right ahead of a cool rain or something, isn't always the most ideal opportune time to do something that's really limited to give it a good shape.
Reminds me of another frustrating thing. I'll have a guy say, well, it's not quite fit yet. Probably needs a couple more days. Let's get the plot done. Well, thanks. And we do things for convenience sometimes. And I had several guys that were, one phone call is, a guy that's scared to death to plant corn. Next phone call is, can I plant my short corn trial, tomorrow? And so a lot of my short corn went in a window when some people were nervous about planting. So hopefully that all ends well. You were talking about spreading the harvest window. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your trials.
Yeah, we can circle back to that. Yeah, so as most of you know, for the last several years, I've done a lot of stuff around crown rot. I kind of got to the point where I was exhausted myself on doing that, because unfortunately I didn't.
Only because he failed to fix the problem.
I've accepted defeat, and realized that there's not a lot we can do around crown rot, and I figured at some point
you could wait till May to plant your corn.
You could, but
that's a very unpopular solution to the problem.
That doesn't that may or may not fix the problem, though. But I guess and we can talk more about that at another time if you want. But really, the key thing for me in regards to crown rot is we've got to protect the crop or alleviate as much stress as we can during grain fill. And that is really the biggest factor that I've seen over the course of the last 4 or 5 years doing those trials, is whether that's hybrid selection and inherent plant health, or the use of fungicides, but managing the stress that the plant feels during grain fill will help minimize how severe that crown rot manifests itself. Now, there are some things that we can do potentially at planting time to try to help minimize that as well, obviously. So, planting in a more, warm, dry soils and not having cool, wet soils, those types of things. Seed treatment to some degree has had some impact. I've had very little luck with any fungicides in furrow, which has been pretty disheartening. Mm-hmm. And the thing, actually, and Lance, I don't know that I've ever pitched this to you, but years ago, Cal made the switch to what we refer to as EDC, which is enhanced disease control, which was a 4x rate of our fungicides, or 2 of the 3 fungicides that we have on our corn. And there's a part of me that believes that maybe we've hit kind of critical mass on the fungicide on seed, and that maybe additional fungicide in furrow really isn't giving us any benefit, because we already kind of have sufficient levels there to do that. Because I really haven't tested anything that doesn't have EDC on it.
Either that, or we just don't have the right active that has activity on the right pathogens to help with crown rot. So none of the fungicides on the market were developed to control those specific pathogens. We were just hoping that some of them by chance would, We haven't really found one that seems to. So either it's a timing issue, a longevity issue, a rate issue, a lack of let's use an example of pursuit on water hemp. It didn't matter when you sprayed it or how much you used, it just didn't control that weed. And it seems like with the fungicides, at least that we've looked at, that they're not very effective at controlling the pathogens that are involved in crown rot. There's multiple pathogens involved in it, so that's another issue too. There's many different species of Fusarium. You could have activity on one, but not others. There's other species other than Fusarium. And so to find a chemical solution to that problem, has proved to be difficult. And I think your comment about alleviating stress, I think that people are usually surprised when you tell them that, the single biggest treatment effect that you've seen consistently is VT fungicide.
Right.
And you're thinking, well, what the hell's that got to do with a root infection?
It has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's all related to alleviating the stress. And it's also why crown rot rears its head when we have environmental stress through grain fill. And in 21, we had, in addition to normal environmental stress, we had all the leaf disease issues that were going on with southern rust and tar spot and other issues that were putting that plant under more stress because its canopy was not healthy as well. So yeah, definitely alleviating stress, has what has shown to be the most effective. And that's also why when we have cool, moist conditions through grain fill and a plant that is living the good life, like it for the most part was in 22, we see much less crown rot.
Yep. Yeah. So sorry I went down that bunny trail, but I've kind of moved past testing that, and really what I'm doing more of this year, and I started it a little bit last year as well, was trying to look at hybrids on the tails of the maturities, and trying to harvest those like how our customers would more so use those. So in my part of the world, it is almost impossible to get people to do trials with 105, 106, 107 day hybrids in them. And typically when we do those, we throw them in with other hybrids in a plot that run all the way through to 120 day corn or 117 day corn or 116 day corn. And we end up harvesting those at a, we don't do those products on the tails of the maturities very good justice. And the same can be said for a lot of soybean plots, right? That we unfortunately, when you expand the maturity so wide, you're doing a disservice to both products that are on the tails of the maturity. So what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to work with customers that have a desire to pick 25+% moisture corn, whether that's for an early premium, for whatever logistical reasons, right, that they want to get started early. So let's look at 105s to 109s in that capacity and harvesting them just like how that grower is going to use them. And I don't want those products to get down to a 15-16% moisture, because that's not how my customers in my part of the world are going to utilize those products.
Right. I mean, there are people that plant early corn because they want to pick dry corn, but most people plant early corn because they want to pick early.
Correct. Yep.
So they're going to pick high moisture early corn.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, a lot of guys that'll start, like I said, at 25+%. And so, historically we've been using, let's say 5982 as that key product, but we've launched some newer genetics the last couple of years. New 105, 106, 107. There's a new 108 this year. So I've been trying to test those and look at, what it's not just about yield, but it's also about moisture, right? So if, do I give up, how many bushel do I give up to possibly gain a point and a half of moisture? And that's kind of the what I'm looking at.
Or really, and I think that's the way our breeding group has historically looked at it, as that yield to moisture ratio. But for a lot of large growers, I mean, it's not so much about the moisture as it is the date.
Correct.
When is it going to get to a point I can stand to start?
Correct. Yes.
And so it's going to get, it's going to get picked at a high moisture, but it's more about, well, how soon can I get started on that high moisture corn? And so, while you're trying to spread that harvest out, spread the maturity range out is the best way to do that. That makes a bigger difference in planting date, because planting date often is not as big a difference as you might think, because things come together as you go through the planting season, and that late planted corn develops faster, the early planted corn develops slower, and there might have been a month difference in planting date that's only a week difference by the time harvest gets here. But if you can spread that maturity range out, and the best way to do it, plant your early stuff first,
right,
and your late stuff last.
Right.
Don't put your 120-day corn in first because you're worried about being too wet.
Yeah.
You're planting 120-day corn, so it's wet.
Right.
So don't screw yourself by planting it first, and then on the backside, if you got to plant late, I know it's not our intent, but if you have to, you don't want to be planting your early stuff last. That's really, asking for trouble, because you're already taking a hybrid that was bred for southern Wisconsin, moving it into central Illinois.
Right.
You don't want to ask it to pollinate in August. That's not what it was bred for. And to be honest, Chris is, somebody that's always asking our breeding group questions and product management questions about products that honestly we don't know, because the breeding group primarily tests things, we would call it in zone.
Right.
And we would see no reason to be testing 105-day corn in Springfield,
right,
because that's out of zone. But there are reasons why people want to grow 105-day corn in Springfield. And Chris is doing some interesting trials to find out, what truly is, because in our data, the yield penalty looks pretty significant.
Correct.
But a lot of that's driven by the fact that they never get harvested timely, because they're always added to a full season plot. The plot doesn't get picked until the wettest corn in the plot is at the desired moisture, typically. And by that time, the 105 days has been ready to come out for a month.
Right.
And
you got phantom yield loss to worry about.
Yeah. So we are definitely penalizing the yield of those early hybrids by picking them too late in a lot of trials.
Yeah. So I'm got a pretty good effort at looking at, like what we just been talking about, early season corn, planted early, harvested early. And then I'm trying to look at the opposite end of that spectrum. So looking at the tail end side, right? So because a lot of customers are going to, they might pick a little corn for a little bit, and then they're going to likely cut a lot of beans or all of their beans. And then they're going to leave corn out there to probably finish with, right? And so they're, to try to look at, one, obviously yield, but the other piece is harvestability and late season intactness, integrity, stock quality, and truly just looking at the harvestability of that product. And so, that's the opposite end of the spectrum that I'm about to embark on. I'm planning those trials because I haven't done any of the full season ones yet. As far as planning them this week.
He did the early ones early.
I did the early ones early. They all went in the week after Easter. And so now I'm getting ready to start on those full season ones, where I'll look at 115s predominantly. I might sneak a 114 in there. And then all the way through basically 118s would be the focus. So that, again, we can look at, and my ask of the customers that I put those with is, hey, I want those harvested in the last, let's say 10% of the acres you harvest. They don't always get that late, but somewhere in that range, because again, I want to do the trials and have the products harvested in the manner in which my customers are going to manage those products, and to try to help answer that question of, well, what can I leave out there till the end? And what's going to work best for that? And again, that one is not always about yield either. I've had guys tell me that, if it's the highest yielding hybrid, that's great. But if I can't get it through the head of the machine, what good does that yield give me, right? So this is about, I'm trying to walk those trials and look at stock quality and look at plant integrity, because if you can't get it in the head, it doesn't matter. And so I guess they'll give up some bushels just to be able to have that plant standing upright and intact so that they can get it through the machine. So that's really what I'm chasing this year, and kind of a heavy focus is, because a lot of times I don't feel like most of our data that we generate from our typical plots, I don't feel like we can do a great job of answering either one of those questions. Right. I think we can hit the masses with the data we have, but some of those unique questions that guys have around the early stuff and on the tail end side, sometimes we can't answer. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to do with the trial work that I'm doing. I'm messing with a few other minor things, but that's the big emphasis that I've got this year. And it's been kind of fun, to try to look at that. And I think, based on what I said earlier about the way this planting window is playing out, I think these late season corn plots that I'll probably be, hopefully planting in this next hitch, see what this weather does the next day or two here. But it may be interesting to see how, if those have to, they plant and, we plant in the third week of April or whatever, and those guys stay out there till the end of October,
Right.
Halloween time period or whatever. It's going to be easy to probably look at integrity and tackness and stability on those products this year.
Right. And if you think about the way we typically do plots with that wide range of maturity of products in there, when you factor in economics, which we do a lot of times, we figure in some drying costs on the wet stuff. The dry stuff gets a little bit of a benefit from drying costs, but the really full season stuff is probably getting penalized unfairly by the moisture that it's being harvested at, because it probably would have yielded the same 5 points drier, at 23 versus 28. And so you're penalizing that full season hybrid with some extra drying costs. And in the real world, you wouldn't have had, because if you harvest it late, it's probably not going to be 28. It's probably going to be 18 or 19 or 20. And that early hybrid is getting penalized. It's getting some economic benefit by being drier, but the economic benefit probably isn't offsetting the yield that it's lost by setting out there for an extra 3 or 4 weeks when it should have been harvested. And so, focusing in on that, that's why within the breeding group, they keep their RM bands very tight. It's, plus or minus 5 days on corn, plus or minus, half a maturity group on soybeans. Our breeders are not comparing a 2.8 to a 4.0 because they know that would be an invalid comparison. So, when you ask us for breeder data comparing a 2.8 to a 4.0, we don't have it, because you really can't do that fairly in a real controlled environment. So sometimes those comparisons that we people ask us for, well, we don't have that because it would be very difficult to do it fairly. And some of this data that we're generating through Chris's trials is getting us a look at some products that maybe weren't tested that far south or weren't tested that far north, or it's we are starting to do more of that out of zone testing, they call it, but we got our hands full getting the in zone testing done, and so the out of zone testing is kind of on the back burner. So all right,
we've had a lot of interesting conveation in our chat.
Well,
since you guys have been going after it.
Okay, so I apologies to the live audience. We've done I do a better job of paying attention to the chat when I don't have somebody here to talk to. So anything we should be addressing from the chat, or is it just FSRs talking smack?
Well,
that can be ignored.
We have a lot of great dealer interaction today.
Okay, cool.
I'll say
cool.
that.
Yeah.
And I was going to sneak in one of our dealers and great friends here, Jordan Zimmerman, had a great question. I think you basically covered it, but I'll still ask it just to make sure we clean up all the loose ends. But he said, can you speak to chilling in corn and beans?
Yeah.
Can chilling happen with a change in soil temperature from cold nights, or do you need a cold rain to experience the chilling? We talked a lot about it on corn. Any adjustments on that bean conversation?
Yep. So great questions, Jordan. And I would say that chilling injury is temperature related. So it's not necessarily, you can get chilling in a cold soil just like you can get chilling from a cold rain. The cold rain typically gets you to that temperature faster, because if the rain that's falling is 37 degrees and that rain is falling on a 52 degree soil, that soil is going to cool down more slowly. But if the moisture that gets to that seed is already colder, that's why they talk more about it from a cold rain. The research that I've done on chilling injury, you can see different numbers, but from what I've read, it looks like in the high 30s is about where membrane damage starts to happen in corn. Soybeans can suffer chilling injury as well. They are, I would say, based on the trial work we've done and the success people have had with early planting in soybeans, I don't know if it's fair to say that soybeans are more tolerant of chilling injury, or they're just more tolerant of an imperfect stand, or they just have yield advantages from early planting that offset some of the challenges. But soybeans are considered to be tougher, more hardy, not as negatively impacted by that as corn. I do think that chilling injury can happen in soybeans as well. It's just that the adverse effects of that in soybeans are probably smaller than they are in corn. And so, I like to, it's one thing I like to point out to growers that, if you're trying to make that decision about do I plant or do I not plant, with soybeans, you can win twice with early planting. You can increase your yield potential and you can get your work done. With corn, I would say you're going to win once. You're not necessarily increasing your corn yield potential by planting it before April 25th, but you're getting the work done. So that's another thing that to me, if you can't plant both crops at the same time and you want to start planting early, well, that's kind of a no-brainer to me. You work on beans first. A lot of guys can plant both crops at the same time. I've got some producers that had a bad experience with some early planted soybeans 2 years ago. They got froze off and they had to replant their early planted beans. Most of those guys this year started with corn because they were worried about, oh gosh, it's so nice. My April beans will be up in 10 days and they're going to get froze off. And so some people were talking themselves out of early beans because it was too nice. And they focused on corn. I really wasn't in that camp, but you do you, as they say. So I think from a soybean standpoint, I'm always more bullish at pushing conditions on soybeans than I am corn for those reasons. I think chilling injury can happen to soybeans just like it does to corn, but the negative effects of that are not as severe. And from a temperature standpoint, something in the high 30s. And with corn, they talk about the first drink of water a lot. So if you plant corn into a moist soil, the first water that seed is going to imbibe is going to be taken from the soil, and it's going to be the same temperature the soil is. If you get that cold rain on that right after you plant, that's kind of the worst case scenario. And that's where that water that's fallen, probably colder than the soil. And if the first drink that seed takes up is that 36-degree rain that's falling, that's pretty stressful. It doesn't mean that it's going to kill it, but it does damage it. And that's where hybrid seed quality, what happens after that, all that stuff kind of comes into play as to whether or not you're going to get a good stand out of that.
Yeah, the fancy terminology there that Jennifer is so proud that she knows, which is imbibitional chilling, is the name for that. But
I've heard people try to show off and they talk about umbilical chilling. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. And so that it's where sometimes these conversations get fun is, and some of the ones I've had recently is it's like, okay, well, what is current soil temperatures? What is the forecast? Is it 3/10 of rain? Is it 2 inches of rain? What's the temperature of that rain? There's a lot of things. Just because we've got a rain coming and temperatures are going to cool down a little bit doesn't necessarily always constitute you shut down the planters. Now, obviously, weather forecasters can be wrong, right? But if I'm carrying, which what we had a week ago, if I'm carrying a 70-degree soil temperature and they're only calling for a 3/10 to 4/10 of amount of rain,
right.
I don't get shook about that, right? And the cool down period was relatively short. Now, if you want to talk about, we're going to set in and have a 3-5 day window of rainy weather that's cool and cold, and we're going to have drastic differences for a period of time, then I might start to think a little bit different. So it's always the wonderful, I think Jennifer typed it in a while ago, right? That it depends.
Yeah.
And we it's not always as Lance alluded to earlier. It's not always black and white, and sometimes we can rationalize through why maybe it's okay to go ahead and keep going, and it's not as risky.
Right. And that's that term risk. I like to remind people. There are people that are devout followers of I'm shutting the planter down ahead of a rain event. There are people that never shut the planter down And depending on what happens, after the fact, one of those two decisions might be better than the other. The vast majority of the time, whatever we do works. So it's not like if you do this, it's 100% failure. It's if you do this, your risk of failure goes up, but it might still be 10% chance of failure. And you're like, well, hell, if it's only 10%, I don't care. So it's not like you're going from guaranteed success to guaranteed failure. It's not like that. You're just going from probable success to less probable success.
Yep. We got about 5 minutes left, and I see there's more stuff in the chat.
I see Adam Henninger's
I was
name
going to
there.
say, Adam,
you can ignore that.
Adam couldn't resist, but I do like Adam's question. It's very on topic before we move on, and then
He actually claimed that he could instigate an argument based on his question. So maybe it's coming here.
And so and Matt Meyer, don't worry, we'll get to your question. I feel like it's a personal attack on myself, but it's okay. We'll move on. So Adam's first question of many is: are there any stand establishment, or other than stand establishment, does imbibitional chilling affect the plant adversely from a critical point of growth and development? And what are those critical points?
So that's Adam asking questions he knows the answer to because he thinks other people would benefit from the answer.
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question.
So that's right. That's right. If he'd have been here, he would have just answered his own question. But so I would say that imbibitional chilling and chilling injury in seed most often impacts yield by stand loss and lack of uniformity. If that seed gets out of the ground and it's still uniform and you've still got the same stand, I'm not sure we've lost any yield potential because of the chilling injury. Vastly likely that something else later to come in the season is what's going to determine our yield potential more than the imbibitional chilling. Did you take the yield of that plant from 500 down to 450? Maybe. But something else is going to happen to take it down to 280 in the real world.
Yep.
But typically when you get chilling injury, any type of emergence injury stress, you're going to lose a few seeds. You're probably not going to get the same final stand, and the final stand you get is going to be less even than it would have been if it would have come up faster with less stress. This might be a bit of an overstatement, but I don't personally think that it is. Anytime corn takes 3 weeks to come up, it's probably not going to yield as well as it would have if it would have come up in a week. Even if you get the same number of plants, which you usually won't, but even if you do get the same number of plants, they're not going to be as uniform. You're going to have more runts. You're going to have more stragglers. The longer it takes to get out of the ground, the more separation you'll get from this seed to that seed. And that uniformity is where we lose a lot of yield potential in corn. It's not necessarily that seedling has less genetic yield potential than it did before, but if it's half a leaf behind its neighbor, it's probably going to have a slightly smaller ear.
Yep.
Alrighty, and then
he continues to go on here.
Yeah,
I see the only comment I care about. Good answer. I agree.
Yeah. I started tuning out of that.
We'll pull that one up.
So we'll end on this question. As Derek Strubing likes to point out, you are in recording and we are going to document this answer. So make sure you think about that when you answer this statement. But Matt Meyer's question.
We reserve the right to be wrong.
Yeah. Matthew Meyer is stirring the pot and wants to know, so we plant, right, for today?
Oh, yeah, we already answered that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what are your final thoughts on it?
So anytime you have questionable conditions, I would prefer to be planting soybeans. I think that's a statement that I would stand behind. Doesn't mean that it's wrong to plant corn, but if you're looking for the lesser of evils option, soybeans can handle what's coming better than corn. I like early planted soybeans, and so if you got your hands full planting beans, go plant beans. If you can plant both at the same time, then do that. I would challenge people who are planting corn instead of beans. If you've got both left to do, and you could do one or the other, I'm not sure why you do corn over beans. Although
they don't want to change the plant over.
Well, yes, there's that, and
I got that one yesterday.
And I'm doing corn over beans because where my corn's going, it's dry, and where my beans are yet to be planted, it's too wet. So that happens to people too. But no, I think it's okay to plant. You gotta, to me, factoring in the size of your operation, how many days of planting do you have left? I mean, all that makes sense. If you've got 400 acres of corn to plant, I don't think I'd plant.
Yeah.
If you got 5,000 to plant, hell yes, I'd plant. So, you don't have to, we don't all have to think like we're farming 15,000 acres, because most of us aren't. And if you aren't, you probably in some cases shouldn't be doing what the people who are do. And I know that's hard, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I guess, I as I said earlier, I'm a firm believer in if the ground is fit, let's go plant. And obviously ground in most cases is fit right now. It's not fit everywhere, but in most cases ground is fit right now. If you want to be a naysayer, I would say planting corn today has, in my part of the world, has as much risk or the most risk of any planting date we've had thus far. Mm-hmm. Because we are going into a longer period of cooler temperatures and lower temperatures than what we've seen since we first started planting in the field. Yeah. So if you wanted to be a naysayer, I think today is probably the day that you would pick on the most. It could be the most problematic.
Right.
Again, we won't know that for 2 or 3 weeks yet to come, right? That hindsight is always 20/20, and I will echo Lance's point that if you've got 70, 80, 90% of your crop in the ground, I think maybe I'd find something else to go do today and not worry too much about it. Now, I know there's some of you that are listening and that are probably like, that could be, I could finish today.
Yeah.
And you probably would love to, right? And we may regret that, we may not, but who knows? So I answered the question without probably truly answering the question.
Yeah.
A typical agronomist.
He's running for office. You could vote for him. So, I mean, back to the point Chris made about this being a stressful time to plant. So Jennifer gave me her 10-day forecast, and I calculated theoretically how many heat units Jennifer's territory is going to get over the next 10 days, and it was 49. And 16 of those are today. So if you finish planting at 6 o'clock tonight, today doesn't really count.
Yeah.
So if you take 16 out of that's 33 heat units you're going to get over the next 9 days following today. And at that rate, it would take over 30 days for your corn to come up. Yeah. It's going to rot in the ground before it comes up at that pace. But this pace is not likely to continue. I mean, May, this would get us through the end of April, basically, this 10-day forecast. And, it's got to warm up at some point. And, I would agree with Chris. It's a little ironic. And this happens to people because of the psychological factors that factor into this. 10 days ago, you thought people who were planting were crazy. Today, you decide to plant. 10 days ago was better than today.
Yeah.
And that can drive you mad, but it's reality. The stuff that went in 10 days ago had that 80-degree week. Hell, that stuff's up in some cases. So you got to understand, how the plant develops and what the plant needs. It takes about 110 heat units to get corn out of the ground. Now we could argue about, well, how's the soil temp heat units different from air temp heat units, and they are different. And there's some days in here. So for example, one of Jennifer's days had a high of 52 and a low of 34. Based on the formula, that gets you 1 heat unit. I would argue that when it's 52 for an hour and a half that day, and it was below 50 for the other, you might as well call that nothing. But the formula gives you 1 heat unit that day. So there's probably days where the soil is warmer than the air, especially if it's work black ground. And so maybe sometimes you get more heat units in the soil than you would in the air. We can't have negative growth. So anytime the soil temp is below 50, or the air temp is below 50, or any temp's below 50, the formula is going to give you credit for being 50, even if it was 34. And it's also a misnomer that growth doesn't occur below 50. Growth occurs down to closer to 40. It's just so slow, we think it's not worth counting.
I know we're past time, but I just thought of something as you were talking about that. I guess there could be the opportunity that if we may see corn get a little confused in the next couple of days, which day is up, or which way is up.
Yeah.
Because the soil will be warmer below than it is above, and corn could start to curl and maybe want to try to go down potentially.
Something that, and you can also, one of the side effects of chilling injury is, hormonally that corn plant just gets confused. It starts being, disoriented. And some would say it's growing towards the warmth, which I think is what Chris was talking about. Others would say it's just, kind of out of whack and it doesn't really know which direction's up. And so it's just growing. And the risk of that is when you're in a cold soil and it's going to take 3 weeks to get enough heat units to get up, you don't want to waste any time growing the wrong direction. And most of those plants that get disoriented become a weed because they either don't come up, they leaf out underground, or they come up so late that you'd be better off if they weren't there at all.
Jennifer, if you want another fancy term, geotropism.
Mm-hmm.
Add it to my dictionary.
All right, so we're past time. So thanks for staying with us. If there's any other good questions, Jennifer?
No, it's just Adam trying to edge in
that's
more
right. That's why I said
random
good.
conversation.
That's why I said good questions. They say there's no such thing as a bad question. Well, I've been doing this a long time, and I've heard some bad questions. So it's kind of like the customer's always right saying. But anyway, appreciate you joining with us today.
Next episode is on May 4th.
May 4th.
And then
the 4th be with you.
Sounds like a beautiful day.
Yes. Hopefully nobody will be on here because we'll be planting. And then next Thursday, we have our next episode of the Agronomist Ask with a social media superstar, Nicole Steckline.
Yeah.
Somebody who watches TikTok or YouTube, you've probably seen Nicole. She's around the Field of Dreams, agronomist out in Iowa. So that'll be an interesting conversation.
She's far more creative than the two of us put together.
That's right. I'll lose half my audience because she's a lot more fun to watch than I am. So looking forward to that. Thank you, Jennifer, for helping us with production. Chris, thanks for taking time. This is hard on him because he's itching to get a plot planted. So thanks for joining with us today. Everybody stay safe, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Pretty good for